So, Bob, I'm going to start with you in Canton, Ohio, if I can, please, because this is the first question I would have asked, and it's a question that's addressed in the book. So the warmest of welcomes. Please go ahead and ask your question, Bob.
Okay. I'm really calling for my son, who's not here, obviously, but he struggles with how do I know God's there when I don't see him, I don't feel him, I don't sense him. He believes there is a God, but he really struggles with that part of it, the relationship.
Bob, thank you so much for your question. I really appreciate you calling in. I mean, this reminds me of a question I got last week from another parent, Bob. I just want you to know you're not alone. Another parent called in on a different show and said, Jeremiah, my son won the Timothy Award in Awana. Now, I grew up in Awana. It's a scripture memory program. He won the Timothy Award, and because of the very same issue, he has walked away from God. So this is an excellent question. God, where are you? We read about all of these great miracles in the Bible, but why don't I sense you today? And Janet, this was one of the top questions we were asked at our Christian Thinkers Society events. This apparent silence, this absence, this apparent absence of God in our life. And that is such a great question, Bob. And I want to say it's a very personal one for me as well. My wife and I want to make sure our audience hears me, experienced 5 years of God's silence. We had an issue in our life of infertility where we could not get pregnant, and God just didn't show up. It was like a do not disturb sign in heaven. We prayed, people prayed over us, people anointed us with oil. I had people of all different kinds of traditions in the Christian faith speak word. We would do anything to get pregnant. It got to a point of desperation. And do you know what that did, Bob? That sent me down a slide of just studying the Word. Here I'm a Bible scholar, and I'm struggling with the silence of God. I'm a teaching pastor in a local, vibrant church, and I'm struggling with the silence of God. And guess what I learned? The silence of God is first real, it's biblical, it's practical, and I want you to hear this. It is not always a bad thing. When you study the mountain peak passages in the Scriptures, both the Old and the New Testament, I'm talking about the titans of the faith. You're going to see they experience times of silence from God. Abraham, 25 years of God's silence. First, if you study 7 chapters in the book of Genesis, you see the chronology there. 25 years of God's silence. Joseph, 13 years of God's silence. One of the most difficult passages for me in the Bible is that cry of dereliction where we hear in Mark's gospel, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani. In the Markan gospel, he gives us the very words of Jesus. He spoke Aramaic, God, where are you? You have abandoned me. And you know what? I learned some inspiring things going through the silence of God, Bob. I did what Jesus did first and foremost. Do you remember what he did when he experienced the silence of God? He quoted the Psalms. I went into the Psalms, and I saw that this is something that happened again and again with the people of God, and he was there. And then I realized there were contemporaries of mine who also experienced the silence of God. Janet, your good friend, Henry Blackaby, wrote this wonderful Bible study, Experiencing God, that everybody did in the late 90s. And did you know that he struggled with intense bouts of the silence from God, this apparent silence? And he realized, as I point out in the book as a testimony, that the silence of God, it doesn't mean chastisement. I mean, a lot of people have this false theology that there must be some sin in my life if I'm experiencing the silence of God.
Yes.
That is not true, and it's not biblical. Jesus, remember they said, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? John chapter 9, Jesus said, neither, but so that the power of God could be manifested among you. And so I think it's important that we remember what happened in the Scripture. Henry Blackaby, I point this out in the book, he realized that if he went through his sin checklist and it checked out okay, he would then immediately realize God was taking him to a deeper level of understanding of himself. I experienced that. And guess what? My wife and I, 5 years later, we got pregnant. We had a daughter, Lily Faith Johnston. She's 6 years old, going on 21. She goes to a wonderful Christian school here in Houston. We have a son, Justin J. Johnston. And Janet, I found out last time I was with you, just a couple days later, I found out we're pregnant again. So my wife's pregnant. We have the third on the way. So it was difficult, Bob, but I was encouraged by the Scriptures, and I was encouraged to see that meant God was taking me to a deeper level. He is there, and I encourage you with that.